Hello everyone, it's Stephen Skripek here and welcome to TRG 30. As we begin, I'd like to remind you all that you will receive an email after today, not only asking for your feedback, but also with a copy of today's presentation and a video of this session too. Before we begin, don't forget that Q&A button to submit your questions, and you can submit those anonymously too if you wish. And if we don't answer your question live today, don't forget to join our LinkedIn TRG 30 group. That's the place to go to find your answer. Our team are ready and waiting there. As always, I'm joined today by our CEO, Jill Robinson. Hi, Jill.
Stephen.
Since we started this journey, 10 weeks ago, Jill, I cannot believe how quickly the time has gone by. We've been moving together from addressing those initial urgent needs of season cancellations, the communications around that, and the operational shifts to where we are now, anticipating our needs, our future models. And those models and plans, as we're hearing from you, are varying greatly right now based on organizational structure, mission, local and national safety guidelines, artistic realities, and even particularly in the US, Jill, America politics. Although I will say to our UK viewers, Dominic Cummings, that's all I'm going to say about politics here right now. As we consider this last point, though, the revolution for evolution, part of what we've cooked up in recent and coming weeks with your weekly feedback in mind is a platter, as it were, of offerings that has us learning from arts and culture thought leaders, yes, our own benchmark with Purple 7, and also adjacent industries too. And so today is the first episode that we're going a little bit further afield, pun intended there, I would add, to explore the perspective, countenance, and confidence of football, of sport. So Jill, sport, we're talking about sport today. Tell us why.
Yes, we are talking about sport. This is the first real focus in an adjacent industry. I suppose Fred Reicheld and our conversation about the Net Promoter Score and system was also a bit like that. But this one is very specific to an industry that has many similarities to arts and culture. So we're going to be asking you and helping you, Stephen and I, asking you to pull up and listen to this conversation and think about the ways that we can apply learnings from sport to arts and culture at this time. And always, you will provide us feedback at the end. We're very interested in how this helps you think or challenges your thinking. That feedback is very important to us. But based on my conversation with our guest today, I think this conversation will provoke your thinking a bit. So, sport, Stephen, it's an adjacent industry, to be sure. We have players and athletes like we have artists in arts and culture. We have seats and prices and price points and admissions and a variety of revenue streams, ticketing, sponsorship, retail, food and beverage, and more, as we'll talk about today. But let's just be reminded that both of our industries, our activities, our energies have been with us as humans for more than 2,500 years. We've engaged for that length of time and more in formal performance, theater, in competitive sport, think, of course, the Olympics. And we've existed alongside each other since ancient Egypt, likely centuries before, in storytelling, in competition, physical competition. Sports and culture are part of the human existence, DNA. Both of our sectors are here to participate in, serve a fundamental human need to connect, to excel, and demonstrate that excellence and share it with other human beings. So today we're going to learn from this adjacent industry of sport from an American collegiate sports expert and my friend, Bob Burda. Bob is the Senior Associate Commissioner for the Big 12 Conference focused on media and communications. And Bob, welcome to you. And And just as you're coming online here, I want to, hello there and welcome to you.
Hello.
And I want to just remind you and everyone here that we met years ago when your wife and I were getting our MBAs together. And over those years, we had many spirited conversations about the similarities between the sector that we're engaged in and our businesses. Like TRG a bit, the Big 12 is a kind of agency of sorts representing a field, a sector of collegiate sports, but also conferences like the Big 12 are organized to create revenue streams, create an infrastructure and system for competition. And as I understand it and have learned from you, the Big 12 is one of America's biggest conferences, and between the biggest 5, you all represent more than 60 of the largest universities. I have that right? Who are the members within the Big 12, and give me any correction I might need.
It's just so impressive to hear you talk sports. And I'm so happy that it took this conversation to get you looking at a sports page and keeping abreast of. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I really appreciate this chance to be with you and your team here. Yes, you did categorize that appropriately. The Big 12 is one of 5 what we call autonomy conferences that operate at the highest level of Division I NCAA intercollegiate athletics. We are comprised of 10 institutions. Even though we were called the Big 12, we were at one time 12 institutions, but we are currently 10 institutions across the 5-state footprint that includes Baylor University, Iowa State, Kansas State, Oklahoma State, TCU, Texas Tech, and West Virginia.
These are big schools. These are schools with massive budgets, lots of infrastructure. This group of 5 conferences represent these biggest universities. And I think of them, when I think about our field, I think about the kinds of organizations that in our field we think of as the best infrastructure, the best funded and resourced, like the National Theater or the National Arts Center in Ottawa or the Met or the LA Philharmonic. This infrastructure and orientation matters. I want to come back to it, but I want to first talk a little bit about business model. So if you pick one of these schools that might have the biggest budget or football program, give us a sense of the scope and scale here. How big is the sports program? How big is the football program? What are the proportions of revenue streams? Just give us a sense of how it works.
Yeah, we'll use the University of Texas as a prime example.
Yeah.
Their current stadium seats about 100,000. It's going under an expansion to expand it to be able to include even more fans on a football Saturday. We produce, on behalf of our members, basically 3 streams of revenue that are distributed back to our 10-member institutions. And they all share equally in the revenue that's generated at the conference level. And that is through our television rights, which we aggregate all of the individual television rights of our member institutions and bundle those and take them to market collectively and sell those to our television partners. So that is a primary stream of revenue for us that is distributed back to our members, as are our championship events, primarily our football championship game and our men's basketball tournament. Generate positive revenue along with 3 other championship events, baseball, wrestling, and softball. Mm-hmm. Generate positive revenue mm-hmm. We're able to distribute back. And then our sponsorships and corporate partner programs. Mm-hmm. There is value in being able to attach your name to the Big 12 and be the title sponsor of the Big 12 football championship game in the case of Dr. Pepper, or of the Big 12 basketball championship in the case of Phillips 66.
So in Texas's case, so basketball season was canceled. We all know that here. Now the question and orientation, in fact, that everyone is moving toward is, in fact, there's been a lot of media attention about it, the football season in the state. So if we think about Texas or any of your university members, so to speak, football represents a big portion of the sports program. And you've described to me that for those universities, there's the income that you described, which is about 30%, and then gate is 30. Can you break out how the university, where that football income comes from and what it looks like?
Yeah, at the institutional level, there's basically three primary buckets of revenue. One is the conference generated revenue that's distributed through the conference office. Secondly is ticket sales.
Yeah.
Getting people to attend their sporting events, and along with that comes concessions and all the other ancillary revenue that's generated around attending an athletic event. And then for them as well, it's their corporate partners and corporate sponsorship programs.
Right.
The three primary buckets. But in the case of college athletics, for the majority of institutions that compete at our level, football is the economic engine that drives the athletic department and sustains the other sports. Men's basketball also generates positive revenue. Depending on the program, baseball and or women's basketball may as well. But in order for these institutions to compete and be classified as Division I NCAA member schools, they have to sponsor a minimum of 16 sports. So if you're at the minimum sports sponsorship of 16, in best case scenario, you have 2, maybe 3 programs of the 16 that are revenue positive that support those other programs. Able to sustain those scholarships, those support staffs, and those travel costs, and everything else that goes along with putting a team together.
So there's a lot more, as this Forbes article and other articles would cite, there's a lot more zeros in sports than there tend to be in arts and culture. But this phenomena that you've described of football being so critically important, we would say football is the blockbuster of the sports season. It drives and enables so many other things. So in theater, that's a Christmas Carol or Panto in the UK. That is Nutcracker. That is any number of blockbuster exhibits in the museum sector that are key revenue drivers, key operational productivity drivers for a season or a year. So there are similarities in the variety of income streams and in the role that football plays in the context of a university that's similar to arts and culture. Now, we have, Bob, I told you, we have listeners from all over the globe, and certainly while you are working in collegiate athletics, sports is your game, and you also know that this is a global issue. The World Economic Forum is tracking how the virus and the crisis is affecting sports. We saw in Germany, one of their most popular and important football leagues just came back, the first in Europe to come back. And I just read, in fact, today that today in the UK, the Premier League made the decision unanimously to return to contact training, including tackling. So this is an update even from this. And in South Korea, we've seen that that baseball has come back. I found this interesting, attendance levels scoped and scaled, and caveats that say if someone comes, if a virus shows itself, that play will be diverted for 3 weeks. Disruptive time affecting the global sports environment, and people in sports are adapting. They are testing and trying. And it's a very, very interesting time, Bob, and I think in yours too. In our sector, every day brings a new change and a new conversation. Just yesterday, Actors Equity in the US released the sort of container and set of guidelines that it can anticipate for professional actors to be their members to be able to resume. And those lots of questions about how that will work and how that will look, and when it actually, when actors will actually be able to start performing. And that's sort of one set of circumstances that are oriented around safety and all good things. And yet in professional sports and in amateur sports, there is a sort of an activation that's happening, so that athletes and the athletes themselves are doing it to provoke and enable them to play. So it's a really interesting time, and all kinds of not conflicting, but side-by-side narratives happening. With that as a sort of a background setting, when I started this conversation with you a couple of weeks ago, I expected we'd spend our time talking about seating and when fans would come back into venues. But as we began talking, and as you suggest, I began reading and getting schooled on sports, I saw this complexity on one hand, but also this confidence and this certainty that you brought to this conversation, that in your arena and in sport, well, let's just talk your arena, that the Division I sports was going to be working hard to try and walk alongside this virus, I asked you, is this existential, this crisis for collegiate sports? Do you remember what you said to me?
Yeah, I said at our level, no. Obviously for some, because not all universities that sponsor intercollegiate sports operate at this level. For some, absolutely. But at our level, no. Is it a disruption? Yes, it is. Are we going to be able to endure and move on? Yes. What's it going to look like? We don't know. But one of the approaches that we've had early on, as we've gained more insight into what this virus means, it's both its short and its long-term implications, is that absent a vaccine, we're going to have to learn how to coexist with the virus. And when the virus emerged like it did this time, the initial reaction was to shut everything down. Now that we've learned from this experience, what's going to happen the next time there's a spike, or if it reemerges in the fall during flu season, or later in the winter? And what our approach has been is let's use the best science that we have available to learn how we can coexist with this, so that if there is an outbreak on a team, we don't have to shut down that whole team. And depending on the outbreak, perhaps we would, but how can we do it in such a way that it wouldn't be disruptive for all the other athletic programs? And how can you carry on? So we've begun mapping out different scenarios with the purpose of some way, somehow having a football season. What that football season looks like is yet to be determined. Is it going to be a traditional season? Perhaps. If it starts on time, are we going to be able to end it on time? We don't know. So we're mapping in the event of a disruption. Or if we have to push it back, what would a non-traditional season look like that starts in the spring?
So this countenance that says probably for some this is existential, but at our level of play, with the infrastructure and resources we have, you actually said to me, we have an obligation to student athletes and to our communities to test and to try. So this conversation is you've already leaned into this this countenance, this shift in perspective. For me, it was a shift, Bob. In our sector, we think about opening with this sense of how will we manage, and how does it work from a math point of view? Is it financially possible? What are the safety requirements? And might we be better served to be dark until we can open with the right set of circumstances? And what I've heard from you is this nimble approach that offers, yes, we may need to open and shut. The mechanics of returning and the opportunities for the return, I want to go there for a moment. So the mechanics of returning, talk a little bit about what you're hearing. We hear about players coming back to rehearse, that's my word, that's an arts word, but to practice now this summer. So let's assume, how is that happening? And how will it happen if an outbreak happens and you're trying to manage a competitive season?
Mm-hmm. Those are all very complex questions with no easy answers. The short of it is the intercollegiate athletic model that's unique to American culture is co-curricular. These are students that are athletes.
Yeah.
So unlike paid professionals, this isn't a pay-for-play model. So we have to ensure that we are putting our students, our athletes in the safest possible environment that we can. So to that extent, we have been consulting with an outside infectious disease agency, as well as with our medical professionals from our 10 campuses in developing best practices. A lot of what's going to be determined for us in the future, those decisions are going to be made by state governors and state officials. And various states begin to emerge from this virus, and they'll go a long way in determining what our campuses are going to look like. There's still discussion taking place on how many students are going to be allowed on campus when fall classes begin. What will fall classes look like? Will they be traditional classes? Will they be online classes? Will they be a hybrid of the two? So there still remains a lot of unknowns, but the one thing that is certain is college campuses are incubators for innovation. And here we are in intercollegiate athletics, a co-curricular activity that takes place on campuses for institutions of higher education. We have to be innovative on what we do. That's what higher education is looked toward, is innovation. And this perhaps is just another opportunity to innovate. Well,
from your lips, I mean, that is the opportunity that we have in arts and culture too, and the creative sector, we hope will help drive some of that innovation. I see Stephen, he wants to ask us some questions here, and I want to make sure that one of them that we ask is about fan loyalty and the like. But Stephen, well, Bob, actually, what's your favorite museum? I need to ask you.
Yes, well, I grew up in the Detroit metropolitan area. Very young, field trips to the Detroit Institute of Arts, and I still to this day, there's a Diego Rivera mural in the atrium there that is a tribute to Detroit industry that I still think fondly of. In fact, I was back in Detroit a summer ago, paid my pilgrimage to the museum, bought a t-shirt with the print of the mural on it. So that one from a young age has been near and dear to my heart and still is to this day.
A+ answer there, Bob Burda. You know the Jayhawks are our favorite sports team, so I've got my question answered. Stephen, help us.
You could just chat all for the rest of the day. It's interesting, the questions coming in, and there's a lot. And so I'd encourage both of you to, if you can, really get to the nebulous of these answers so we can get some, because they're great questions. There are a lot of them around the mechanics, I would just say that. And so the first one from Katie Schaefer, thank you. How is the conference and/or individual colleges changing any sponsorship proposal packaging, benefits or engagement?
Well, there's been a lot of back and forth with our marketing rights, and corporate sponsorships are held by a third-party entity. So when our basketball championship and the remainder of the athletic year was canceled back in March, we are in a position for either a lot of make goods or to creatively figure out how we can come up with value adds down the line. And we've been looking at different things. One of the things that we're considering is the possibility of an esports tournament. Obviously, esports has gained tremendous popularity. It is widely followed amongst the subset that populates our campuses. So we're looking at sponsoring at the conference esport tournaments and use that as an opportunity to provide added value to some of our corporate partners that lost the exposures that would go along with our championship events.
Innovation.
Innovation. Thank you. Ben, thanks for your question. With so many layoffs in the corporate sector, are you projecting declines in corporate support? If corporate declines do happen, how will the league respond?
Well, again, a lot of that is tied to our corporate partner program. Now, depending on what the football season looks like, if we're playing in empty stadiums, that means those 50,000 to 100,000 people that would go and populate a stadium are going to be watching these games on television. And we anticipate that if we're playing with no fans or limited fans, our television numbers are going to spike significantly year over year. So we think that there will be additional opportunities for sponsors around the televised aspect of these events.
This is a really important question to there's a couple here around the same theme. What's the Big 12 doing to reward, manage loyal ticket buyers, season ticket holders, boosters, donors in the situation where fans won't be able to attend in person, or where only some fans will be able to attend in person due to social distancing restrictions?
Yeah, and you know, the ticketing operations are managed at the local level by our institutions. And it's been amazing at their season ticket renewal rates for football season, given the uncertainty of the climate, that we've got some that are at 90% renewals.
Wow.
And that's given the uncertainty of whether or not they're all going to be able to come back. So they've been devising ways of being able to recognize and honor their most loyal season ticket holders or their highest level donors, and give them opportunities depending on social distancing requirements in the state, how many people can come back into the stadium. The other thing too that they're looking at is that this is we talked about innovation. This is a great opportunity to innovate and develop the next group of donors and longtime supporters, and that's being students. Assuming students are back on campus, there's always a carve out in the stadium for so many students to be able to attend.
Mm-hmm.
So how do you use this opportunity to bring more students into the stadium, engage them at a level that they may not have been sitting in the student section, and use this opportunity as a way to cultivate your next season ticket buyer base and your long-term donors, so that the next generation of supporters?
There's absolutely a corollary here. It blew my mind when you said this. The student section is this allocated section. And in arts and culture, there's often a price-based, assumption that students are buying at a certain price, it's in a certain location. And you said to me, what if older fans were to not attend, gift tickets to students, or we were to find a way to cultivate and give the best seats to students who might see the benefit of being cultivated and serve as future donors for universities? Same kind of with whom will we gather question when we regather that arts and culture is faced with too.
Jane asked a question there actually, and this would be interesting to hear your thoughts. Am I correct in assuming that your demographic skews typically younger than those of us who program in performing arts, or not? And do you think that informs those who will return to sports as opposed to those who will return to the concert hall? And I would just layer another question to that: in the differences between this being outdoor versus indoor, does that impact thinking and action here? And not all sport is outdoor, right?
Correct. And yeah, absolutely. And that's where the advice of our medical professionals and outside consultants are going to come in terms of what does our fans look like? And yes, given the risk of the older subsection of fans, they may be less willing to come back and mass assemble than younger folks. And to the earlier point, how do you use that as an opportunity to cultivate the next generation by giving them a premium experience? But at the same point, you certainly don't want to force people to mass gather if they're not comfortable doing that. And that's one of the other aspects that our ticket managers and institutions are looking at is, okay, if these people have made a commitment to buying season tickets and they choose not to because of health or for whatever reason, given the current environment, to either offer them full refunds or the ability to roll their donation over to next year and give them priority seating for the 2021 season.
we're almost at time. It always runs fast, but there's one more question that I think we should close on, actually, which says, this conversation allows me to see the challenges my organization is facing differently. With so much revenue hinging on sports, the focus becomes on revenue and not the mission of developing character of athletes. In arts, we hold the mission closer, with revenue a means to make the mission, but sports is different. Should this be more existential to sports than it appears to be?
Well, that's an interesting question, and probably one that we can discuss for the next 30 minutes if we have such a window. You know, it varies, but the thing to not lose sight of is that very few of those that play collegiate athletics at our level go on to play professionally. That this, you know, less than 2% overall play in the professional ranks. So for those that don't, for that other 98%, playing college athletics is a means to an end. It's an opportunity to get a college education and develop life skills that will serve you well for the remainder of your life beyond your playing days. So in that regard, it's more than existential. It's a life-enriching, life-forming experience.
Boy, we could keep talking forever and ever here, and I am so grateful to you, Bob Burda. One of the questions, I know we're long, and anybody who stays will just hear his answer. I was curious about what you think sports would be like without television, and in that conversation, you laughed, and I asked you to be reminded about the stories of when sport was not televised, and the fear about that as our sector begins to experiment with new ways of digitally communicating its art form. There was a good deal of fear when that transition was made in sport.
Absolutely. There once was a time where all the television rights were controlled by the NCAA, and in order to protect the revenues, they only televised one game a week. And it took a Supreme Court ruling for the institutions to be able to retain their television rights and to bring those to market themselves and not have to do it under the auspices of the NCAA.
This is another conversation that could go 30 minutes, but innovation and the expectation around innovation, care for athletes, and the service that collegiate football, collegiate sports plays to student athletes. Bob, I could not be more grateful for your time today. And you can see we're continuing TRG 30 and upcoming guests that are coming. Stephen, take us out quickly.
Yeah, I would also say there's lots of key takeaways to summarize from here. On our LinkedIn virtual network, Kerry Mesopov, our president, each week has a summary to help provocate and help us think and gather our thoughts around here. And I think there's a lot certainly to take from this discussion today, Bob. Thank you so much. We'll see you next week. It was a pleasure having you all with us again, and we look forward to being with you again next Wednesday. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Thanks.